Good morning. Let's see how I go. You may notice that my voice is not ideal. I have been rather unwell, but let's soldier on, hey, and see how we go. Let's see if I end up having a coughing fit or passing out or doing anything else that fucking. Let's see how we go, eh? Give it a go. I'm sorry I've had to cancel a few times, but I really want to talk about this because I think that people are freaking out and they don't need to freak out. Okay? And I'm going to actually rant for quite a bit. I'm going through it, but I'm also going to fucking rant a bit about activists and why I fucking hate. This is why I don't join any fucking tribes, because you're all fucking nuts. So anyway, I look like shit. I've overcompensated on the face color to hide the fact that I look like shit. But let's soldier on, shall we? Okay. So, yeah, so say I'll see. Connie said, say it'll be a short stream and then you'll be fine for hours. Yep, it'll just be 15 minutes. And it'll just be a quick one. And I am actually streaming to Periscope, but I've just decided that the chats aren't going to show up, and I'm just going to ignore Periscope because I don't want to. I just need to train myself to ignore fuckwits better, because people do watch on there. So, but worst case scenario, I will have to kill it anyway. Housekeeping over. You get to listen to my really fucking sexy fucking voice at the moment. And let's go from there. So, everyone's fucking freaking out. You don't need to. Okay? Now, so basically, I can see how it looks, right? So, Western Australia, a bit of background, right? In Western Australia, self-ID was attempted. I'm not sure of the year because I wasn't part of it, but I do know for a fact that at one point there was a push for self-ID, which, for those that are new, self-ID means that if you just by declaration, so no need for no need for a doctor or any surgical intervention or anything other than a stat dec or a form or payment of a fee, like deed poll, right? Changing your name, you can change your legal sex / gender, right? And this is where it starts to get fucking muddy, is because a lot of people just conflate the two. And I think I'm just seeing a way forward. And I think that a lot of people are being just unnecessarily unconstructive, dare I say, in the criticism, because the horse is bolted, right? Gender is happening, okay? Gender identity is protected in the Sex Discrimination Act. Discrimination against somebody for gender identity is illegal, right? Now, we can talk about the Trojan horse. We can talk about whether that also extends to the 300 genders. We can also have conversations about that. But what I want to talk about is the law as it stands, right? First of all, what is a fact? What's the fucking reality of the situation? Right? Which is, just because you don't think gender's real doesn't mean there's a lot of people that don't think it's real. Okay, first up. Okay, this is part of my frustration, and I'm going to talk about the role of religion and belief in society and how yelling at people that the shit they believe isn't real doesn't get you anywhere because they believe it. Okay. I want to talk more about the role of the state and the role of the government and the obligations that the government has to protect human rights and all of those sorts of things. And that's the problem with this fucking issue, and that's my problem with activists, especially. And you know what? I'm going to piss off the rad femmes today. You're a club too, and your purity fucking shit is unconstructive as well, because yelling at people that gender's not real isn't going to get you anywhere either. At this point, the horse is bolted. It's now, I meant to look this actually up, this term, but I've read it before. There's a number, there's a critical mass with a belief, right? That once it gets to like 5 to 10% of the population, it is now a belief. You can't get rid of it. It is mainstream, okay? We have to accept that there is a large portion of the population, even if dumb, even if it's not real, okay? Even if you disagree. There's a number of people who believe that. Now, this is the role of the fucking law and the state and all of these things. So yelling at people that the shit that they believe isn't real isn't going to get you anywhere in a policy conversation. Okay, you can have a debate. This is basically the exact same fucking bullshit between the atheists and the Christians, and it's fucking holy wars all over again. There comes a point where every argument has been had, okay? And you're not going to get anywhere. We need to move forward. The role of policy is so that people who disagree can learn. The role of the law is to mediate, and to people who disagree and hate each other so we can learn to fucking live together. That's what the law does. Okay? That's what democracy is. That's why democracy, as imperfect as it is, and why pluralism, as messy as it is the only way forward. Now, if you're authoritarian and bullying someone else for their belief or non-belief, right, then you're a problem too, and you need to be sort of reprimanded within the process. That's one of my critiques with the trans rights movement. But sitting in the corner yelling that trans isn't real is not going to get you anywhere with the fucking government, okay? It's just not going to get you anywhere. So I'm just going to get that off my chest, okay? Even if I agree with you, right? The government has an obligation to fucking keep everyone happy, everyone safe, and everyone, like living peacefully as best they can, okay? It's just fucking reality. That's democracy. Okay? And if you're being a fucking authoritarian, no matter what fucking club you're in, and demanding that these democratic institutions do 100% of what you want, then you're a part of the problem too. You're not going to get it. Okay. Now, that said, I agree, right? This is why having people fucking lose their minds, right? And this is why the optics of this stuff is, okay, I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but there's been a misunderstanding here, right? Which is the optics, right? If you only saw the West Australian article and only saw the release and reacted to that release, I can see why. This is why I think it's very important to deal to, that principle of charity that I was talking about, but also really dealing with your own shit, trying not to project or transfer, right? In therapy, it's called transference or projection. They're very similar things. Transference is when you transfer feelings, like transfer feelings, positive or negative, onto a therapist, right? So like there's or projecting, right? But there's fine lines, but they're two things. You need to fucking be aware of that shit when you're doing these things, right? Because I did this. I jumped to conclusions. The first thing I did, because I'm balls deep in this thing, right, like a lot of you, is I'll show you the release and I'll show you where this went wrong. Because when you actually read the policy, okay, it's fucking like, I don't know what people want other than for, like, what, there is some fucking credibility to this notion that, like some of the stuff that trans activists say, right, I can see where they're coming from. They might not be might not be in a very friendly package, or it might be extreme, or it might be hyperbolic, but there is something like valid, right? This idea like that gender criticals or TERFs or radfems or whatever don't want trans people to exist, or they believe that trans people don't exist, right? And I can see that, because when you see something like this policy, and I've sat down and I've contacted some academics I know who are working in this space, feminist academics. I have contacted some people who I know have been part of this policy process, and I've talked to just people that I know, right? And also read the fucking stuff. And when you see something that's actually pretty reasonable, all things considered, right? Considering the fucking toxicity of this debate, considering that there's problems in the law, which I'll go through, right? Where the problem is not with this policy. The problem is the fact that government departments are under obligation to comply with certain legislation, right? Like the Sex Discrimination Act or the human rights law, all of these things. It's more complicated than just being woke. Okay, and that was the thing, right? This is why you need to make sure that you fucking keep your head screwed on, because you know what? Like, there's part of me that I'm not surprised that certain women's groups aren't fucking consulted in these things, because it's unproductive. You're not going to get anywhere because you're sitting there hijacking the process just as much as any fucking TRA. Now, yes, we can talk about censorship, deplatforming, bullying of women. They are separate issues, but don't behave the way that you're being treated. It's just like, have a little bit of charity. The principle of charity always applies in my case, and I always give the benefit of the doubt as best I can, and I always try to understand where the other person is coming from. Even if they're wrong, I try to walk through and diagnose and see where they're coming from. And just turning around and saying, oh, fucking, it's just you hate women. Yeah, there's a lot of people who hate women, or there's a lot of people who have a lot of shit to deal with. There's a lot of feminists who have a lot of shit to deal with as well, and a lot of trauma that they fucking transfer and project onto other people. And just, and also don't assume that how you would act in a situation is how other people would act. That's the principle of charity that I've talked about before. Okay. Now, I know I'm going to piss everyone off today, but who gives a fuck? If you can bear listening to this fucking voice, push through. It means you love me and it means you'll forgive me. But, you come here, I have a feeling that a lot of the people that watch my things and watch my videos come to me for these moments when there's actually some fucking good, the glimmers of some good policy here. It has fallen down because they have been sort of not consulting with women's groups or radical feminist groups, but there aren't any, really. We're not organising, right? Where is the fucking rad fem group here, right? That's the point. Who are they going to consult? Who's the body, right? They don't fucking hang out on Twitter, right? That's what I'm saying. So it's just like, okay, all right. What else we fucking expect? Now, this was my thing, right? Trans activists have a point on a couple of fucking issues, because when I read this policy, right, my first thought was, okay, the Twitter thread that I did with this is actually interesting because I reacted to the fucking release, because what I saw, I'll show you the release actually. Let's do the screen share, right? So, look, you can see why we all went, fuck, okay? So the first thing for me was the Orwellian thing, right? Because again, when you're balls deep in this movement, you see you sort of jump to conclusions, right? It's very easy to get into this culture wars. Oh, fuck this fucking reactive thing. Here we go again. But calm your tits, ladies, okay? Calm your fucking tits. So, dignity, respect at heart of trans prisoner reforms, right? Trans and gender diverse prisoners may be considered for placement in a West Australian prison that is different to their legally documented gender under new Department of Justice policies, right? Now, my reaction was, oh, fuck, they've used the colonizers' rainbow flag. So that was my first sort of red flag, right? Flag, but the flag that's basically the trans movement fucking the rainbow in the ass, right? And I went, fuck, okay, here we go. So again, projection, pattern memory, we kind of go on to autopilot, right? But again, you have to push through principle of charity sometimes and just read the fucking thing, all right? So anyway, the comprehensive corrective service policies and procedures concerning trans, gender diverse and intersex prisoners or youth detainees took effect on November 23rd. Now, the alarming thing was that this just dropped without any notice. It was just announced. Okay, now, again, they're a government department. This is policy. That's not unusual, but again, jumping to conclusions, because the West Australian basically just dropped it at 2 a.m. as an exclusive story behind a paywall where there was not a lot of information about who was consulted or anything like that. It was just a sudden thing. That was slightly alarmist. Again, it looks bad. Again, because the opposition party were changing leaders, right? And it looked like, again, those that are in this movement, it looks like there's a bit of an MO going on, right? Where there's some sneaky business going on, right? Anyway, don't be a fuckwit. I made as my mug. I got to make the graphic a bit smaller, but I ordered a sample. Look, so don't be a fuckwit. It's reversed. The camera's mirrored, but don't be a fuckwit. Anyway. So, okay. So I can see why everyone sort of flipped out. First of all, the West Australian didn't help because they poured gasoline on the whole thing, right? Second of all we had was a press release. Then I went to Corrective Service website to try and read the policy, right? And I couldn't find it. And again, jumped to conclusions because they didn't. Went to Corrective Services and I searched transgender, right? And then it turns out that their content management system, it's all PDF documents and Word documents, and those don't come up in search unless, so there's no real tagging. So the thing is that the policies were there. You just had to figure out how to search for them. So then I found the policies. Okay. This is the thing. I always go, okay, this was the journey I went through. So here we go. Actually, before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remind you of the Sex Discrimination Act in Australia. This is for the UK people, right? Because I think a lot of people who are sort of invested in these sort of wars, right, don't realise that, Australia has slightly different laws to the UK. We have different legal fights. We have different decisions. Yes, UK, Canada, and America are very influential in Australian law, but Australian law is still Australian law. And we do actually distinguish and have done, right, for some time between, where are we? Where are we? We've actually discrimination, right? This is the Discrimination Act, right? Sex Discrimination Act, 1984, right? But where are we? Hang on. But they actually do differentiate between, look, don't know if you can see that. Hang on. Fuck me. This is terrible. Okay. But discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, discrimination on the ground of gender identity, intersex status, marital relationship status, pregnancy or potential pregnancy. So we've got very clear, right? We've also got a reasonableness test when it comes to things like indirect discrimination. Okay. Now, these things okay. Again, this is the problem that I have with fucking, especially culture wars fucks. Taking one document out of as the only document. Now, so in Australia, we've got the Sex Discrimination Act, right? We're also subjected to human rights law and various other acts, right? So you've got federal legislation that is overarching on all of this, right? And there is a reason for talking about this. And that is that you've got law, right? But then you've got your state law, okay? Then you've got the Prisons Act, right? 1984, which details all of these sorts of things. Then underneath that, that's sort of passed by Parliament. That's like the law, that's the legislation. But government departments pass policy all of the time. I've talked about this before. Now, the prisons, right, are extremely, very siloed and they've got a lot of policy. They've got a lot of, it's called delegated legislation, basically, but it's policy, right? It's for the operations, it's operational stuff, policy stuff, and all of that sort of stuff. So that's the role of policy. Sorry, I apologize for being sick. It's very hard to get through this, but we'll do what we can. Let me move to the camera fucking thing. Hang on, let me just fix something because, hang on, give me a sec. It's driving me nuts. Hang on, let me give you a bit more chat shit. There we go. Okay, now, so I'm going to say what I want to say, and then I will. Okay, now, this is I think I'm a bit frustrated with all of this because I think that people are just fucking overreacting all the time and just freaking out where they don't need to, and also putting their energy in all the wrong areas, right? So, first of all, in Australia, Sex Discrimination Act, it's a thing, okay? That's largely, and also it is actually illegal, right, to discriminate, right, on the subject to reasonableness tests, right, according to gender identity. Now, because we're smart people, we all know what the implications of that are, right? Now, you can turn around and say it doesn't exist. Doesn't matter. It's in the law, okay? Gender identity, you can believe what you want to believe, okay? That's fine. But gender identity is enshrined in the Sex Discrimination Act here, right? There's no conflation in Australian law between sex and gender, right? That's where it started to get confusing, because gender identity is specifically catered for in law. Now, whether that includes fucking moon gender, that needs to be sorted out at the federal level with legislation and clarified and defined, either through court, through case law, or through through legislation, right? And modifying of the act. Okay, I think that at some point there's going to need to be some sort of amendment to that act that actually clarifies what gender identity means and the legal implications of that. Because right now, obviously, that is where a lot of these problems are coming unstuck. Okay, now, so, but in 1984, I think it was one of those things where you pass law with the words that you meant at the time, and it was clear in 1984, but it wasn't necessarily clear now. It's not necessarily clear now what that means. So what the law needs to do, or the legal process needs to do, is define that, right? That's how the law should work, right? So, now, okay. Back on track, Taya. Sorry, I just read your comment, Connie. Yeah, I've got to get on doing some bit more merch, but the problem is that, like, when you use this print on demand stuff, it's print will get most of it. I make like $5. You're better off just, if you want to spend $30 or $40 on something that you don't really want, then you may just give me the fucking money. Unless you really want it and really want something, then it's a bit different. But I don't actually make much money off it. So, and the shipping takes forever. Like, my sample took like, I think 3 weeks to get here. And I know that it's COVID and stuff, but I'm just saying, right, I don't know if it's a viable thing to really make bank on. But anyway, so anyway, back to the policy. Sorry about that. No, it's okay. You're not derailing. I haven't streamed in a while. We're chatting. It's all right. People come for the fucking derails and the bits and pieces. So anyway, okay. So yes, so a lot of this policy, right? Now, the thing that you need to know about the prisons, corrective services in particular, is that they're highly fucking regulated. Every process is documented, okay? Now, also, this policy works in context with other policies. So when you're in policy land, right? I've told this story before about how when I was working at a university and we needed a social media policy, right? The same thing happened, where we could either write a 30-page comprehensive fucking policy on social media, right? Or you say everything that applies here, in terms of you're subjected to the code of conduct, ethics, fucking all this stuff, all of those things. Behave online as if you were offline, right? Here's 10 guidelines. Here's some rough ideas. This is how to handle the situation. Fucking, we're not writing like lots and lots of policy, because when you write too much policy, this is the thing, right? You end up overpainting it, and you also end up creating a situation where policies contradict other policies, and because there's different departments doing different things, different words. This is largely what's happened with, I think, sex and gender as well, and in prisons, right? So it's actually worth going and reading what is it? There's a whole number of policies on female prisoners, for example. There's a whole number of, there's a strip search policy. There's all of these, all of these policies, okay? They all interact with each other, but they're all done largely by different teams. So what happens is, so the policy process, if you haven't worked in government, maybe you don't know how this stuff works, but you're in charge of this policy. That policy is a project, right? So you have to identify who the stakeholders are. You identify the problem. You work with a committee to identify the problem. Engage stakeholders, draft policy, get it through. All of those sorts of things. Get it signed off. Go up to the fucking high ups to get it signed off. Right now, you will, as part of that process, see if there's any interaction. If you're good at policy, which I don't know. it's varying. Not everyone's good at their job, right? Some people do conflate sex and gender, and there's a whole committee of dummies, and that's fine, right? That happens. But there are some checks and balances in place where, it goes through legal, it goes through all these things, right? And but badly written policy does get through, right? And illegal policy gets through. A lot of stuff gets through and doesn't sort of cause any kind of issue until it's challenged in the courts, right? And that's the thing, right? It's a whole fucking it's a beautiful system of checks and balances. And yes, things fall through the cracks. It's going to happen. Someone's going to take the piss. There's going to be a Yaniv situation. There's going to be a fucking Karen White situation, and it's going to be action. And yes, but this is the thing about running a thing where millions of people have to live together in peace. Okay, policy is hard work. It's hard to find good policy, especially when you're working under the constraints of human rights law and things like the Sex Discrimination Act, human rights when it comes to prisons, that's very heavily coded, right? And so this policy, right, the transgender policy, fits in context with all of that other policy. All right, it's not just here's a special document just for one group of people. What policy does, and it's obvious what this one is. This is a policy document that's largely for corrections officers where it is not clear, okay, there is no clear process, there is no clear process, no clear understanding, no clear directive on how to handle self-identifying transgender inmates, whether that be non-binary, whether that be, trans women or trans men, right? It's a thing, okay? It is a thing. Now, I see this now. The way to assess this, it's not so much how you, so in the prisons, right, you've got to look at, let me just reverse, let me think my thoughts for a second. Let me think. But you've got, so basically in the justice system, you can't just go breaking people's human rights, first of all. Second of all, you've got to treat prisoners with dignity. Second, we've got a massive shadow when it comes to Indigenous deaths in custody, right? There's a massive fucking black mark on our fucking institutions and the stolen generations. There's a whole context to this stuff around human rights. And government departments are very gun shy about getting this stuff wrong, because when you get it wrong, even when you think you're doing right, okay, think about the stolen generation, right? Largely, okay, people thought they were helping. They thought they were doing the right thing, right? They saw young kids, being sort of neglected, right? Whatever. Again, there's cultural differences there, and we've had, this is just learning from this, okay? And there is that shadow of history when it comes to oppressed groups, right? Now, also, whether you agree with that they're oppressed or not is irrelevant, okay? Because also in prisons, it's basic human rights and dignity and those sorts of, and compassion and those sorts of things. You have to make allowance for cultural differences. You have to make allowance for disabilities. You have to make allowance for special needs. You have to make allowance for neurodiversity and other things like that. You have to make allowances for religious practice. Okay, so if you're in prison and you're of a particular religion, they cannot stop you from practicing your religion. Now, you see where I'm going with this, okay? Gender identity is enshrined in legislation. It is acknowledged, okay? It is believed in by a large portion of the population, whether correct or not, okay? It is not based in science, but gender dysphoria is, but the act is unclear. So this lack of clarity is going to have people take the piss. I don't think blaming the prisoner, okay, or blaming somebody, the trans people who identify are to blame here, okay? I think that a lot of people are victims from a lack of clarity. I think the institutions are doing the best they can under these fucking unclear times, right? And yes, there is a push. Yes, it has been taken advantage of. Yes, all of these things that we've talked about before, right? The things that I assumed were happening, which was this sort of, TRA extremes coming in. It's not as much as you might think it is. Curtin University and mental health bodies and like the government isn't Twitter. Most people are sitting in an actual room conversing with each other with nobody screaming at them. Okay. Most of these people are fairly fucking reasonable and they're actually fairly educated people. There's a blind spot here because of the lack of clarity and an ideological difference, and also a bunch of sort of, dodgy practices underneath. But I think that we need to elevate this conversation. I've been saying this for a long time, which is that a lot of this stuff is largely being fueled by disinformation. It is largely being fueled by AstroTurf and bot movement, and also get the fuck offline. Okay. Because this actually looks like a whole lot of good intentions. Now, I'll go through it and I'm going to talk about why. Give me a second. Let me have a drink. I hope my voice is not terrible. But I'm going to tell, I'm like Radfems, I love you, but fuck. Get offline. Deal with your trauma. Okay. Yes, I agree with you. You are right, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's no different. Okay. Religion, prisons. This is the context, right? So I'll go through this, and I'm talking about this first. I'm framing this before I go through the policy, because this is a principle of charity, okay? I'm trying to get you into the way that I approach this, which is the assumption that, first of all, people are moderately okay at their jobs, right? And majority, on average, okay, competent at their jobs. That people mean well, okay, that people are trying to do the right thing, that they are solutions focused, that they're trained in policy and the policy cycle, like I am. Funnily enough, I think people who work in policy have the same degree I have. So I assume that they know what I know, which is that stakeholders need to be consulted. Do you think Mark McGowan and politicians aren't aware of the culture wars? I'm just saying, they're in politics. Of course they know what's going on, right? So my point is that sometimes there's just a fucking job to be done. And there's no, do we have a group? People aren't just going to call me up and go, hey, I like your YouTube channel. Do you have any thoughts on this policy we're passing in prisons? That's not how it works. I need to organise, okay? So, okay. Make a body. So, my point is, in prison, they can't stop you from practicing your religion, first of all. Gender is a thing. It is enshrined in legislation, okay? Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it's true or not, it's a thing. Now, the problem of transgender identity in prison is a real one, okay? There is a real safety risk for trans women in prison, okay? Now, whether you believe that, again, arguing that they're men is kind of I'm not saying it's a moot point, because obviously it's significant, okay? There is a conflict in the Act. In the Sex Discrimination Act, there is a direct conflict between gender identity as it stands in 2020 and as is ill-defined, right, in 2020, right, as it was in 1984 when it was clear what it meant, okay? Because obviously the norms have shifted to the point where, the interpretation has gotten a lot more broad, and that's where it needs to be clarified. But there's direct conflict there. But I also think that saying that trans women are men for the purposes of policy, okay, is a somewhat moot point, or not somewhat, I don't want to say moot because that sounds like I'm ignoring the issue. The point is that if you are, okay, let's say the hypothetical scenario of a post-op transsexual woman in prison, right? All of the accommodations are set up for women. They're different accommodations. The prisons are physically set up differently, okay, to accommodate women, right, versus men. They're different things, like like just everything. The whole. If you actually read the I'm not going to Google on stream, but there's the incarceration of women fucking strategy documents. It's its own separate set of guidelines. They have to, everything. Okay. So literally, like you'd have to fucking, it's like the whole toilets thing. To have a third toilet, you'd have to have a state mandated renovation of every toilet. It's like we have to work with what we've got at the moment. That's one factor. Okay, one factor. Second of all, like again, self-ID aside, let's use the transsexual scenario, right? You need to make accommodations, okay? Now, whether that's in a women's prison or not, I don't know. But people are trying their best, okay? Anyway, side on. This is a side point. This is just how I feel about this, okay? Because everyone's just fucking screaming. And it's just ridiculous, okay? There is a fucking vast difference between a post-op transsexual who is in for non-violent crime, non-sexual offences, all of those things, who's lived as a woman, right, whatever that means, for, 20 years versus a fucking serial rapist, the hypothetical serial rapist, murder, tattooed biker dude who self-IDs as a woman and gets into prison, okay? We need to just fucking look at that scenario and say they're different fucking scenarios. They're completely different. You can't couple those two scenarios in, first of all. Second of all, they've really put safeguards in place in terms of process with this policy. Like, I don't see how anybody can see the language of this, right, and think that a murderer can just go in and say I'm a woman and just be transferred. Like that's you just don't understand the law. Okay. And at the process, yes, processes fail. Yes. Okay. But they've incorporated some of those lessons from other places into this policy. And that's my point, is that it's not going to be perfect, but I hope that we can move towards better policy in time. Okay. So, and I know everyone fucking stay mad, whatever. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you this first, right? Which is relevant instruments. When there's a policy, right? So you've got policy directives. So relevant instruments. These are, right, all of the fucking things that interact with the policy. This is the religious and spiritual activities one, but I think that this is cogent or relevant because I think that this is where roughly this is heading. Okay, which is that it's largely being considered more in the belief realm versus the evidence base. And I think that gender identity needs to be decoupled. So you've got there has to be some sort of legal distinction here between a self-ID gender identity and a gender dysphoria gender identity, and those sort of being decoupled from each other somehow. Okay, the problem with this is that this fucking trans umbrella has become fucking meaningless. Like non-binary, like all these things, they just become fucking meaningless. It's rendered the whole problem fucking messy. But if we bite this off in little chunks, okay, like a Christian needs, Sundays off. A Jewish person observes Saturdays, right? Muslims need the ability to do this, right? People need to do these things, right? These are tangible, actionable things that can be done to support that person in their belief, to give them maximum dignity and privacy and all those things. Because at the end of the day, the dignity, privacy of prisoners, of all prisoners, and safety and security of the prison, those things all interact with each other constantly, right? Again, I'm not, but this is the thing where it's like, part of me, like I said the other day, I was like, I do wonder if there's a bunch of fucking, so what do you propose we do with trans women, right? I mean, do we just kick them into the sun? Is that the solution? Like, what solution are you proposing in policy other than this? Are you saying that there is a trans wing in each prison with single accommodations, right? Where in a men's prison with mostly male officers, right? Mostly male guards, mostly male, all of those things, right? That that trans women go into like that environment, right? It's confusing, and that does actually seem not very nice. Like, and again, yell at me for saying it's not nice and gaslighting. I don't care. You know what I fucking meant. It just doesn't seem very fucking fair. And also, that's a human rights violation, right? And that's the thing. It's like, you can't yes, women's rights are not up for like bargaining, right? But at the same time, you can't be absolute about things that are hypotheticals either. Okay, at this stage, in Western Australia, under this policy, it is hypothetical. Okay, it remains to be seen. So anyway, let's look at the policy. Sorry, I've just wandered. This is the problem with being sick. Now, look at this. So, in the context of the following, so this is how policies work. They interact with all of the law, all of the Act, all of the other policies, okay? This just fills a gap that clarifies probably some unclear stuff, I imagine. It's not just work points, it's actually just something to clarify, right? So, principles in the context of the following, right? That staff demonstrate respect for detainees' individual needs and rights to health and well-being. Again, that's something that everyone needs. Guiding Principles for Corrections, Australia 2018. Okay? Upon admission, detainees undergo an initial assessment to identify any immediate needs and facilitate access to appropriate services. Okay? Human rights, prisoners' rights. Okay? The same that you would do for a Christian or anybody else. Okay? Detainees are accommodated in a safe and livable environment which considers both risk and individual need, particularly those who are most vulnerable. Okay? Individuals are managed and supervised in a manner that responds to their particular needs and risks, including the impacts of victimization and trauma. Right? Again, these things apply to other prisoners as well. This is the thing, this applies to all prisoners. This policy slots in to clarify specific issues related to transgender people, right? Now, transport of detainees is conducted in a safe and humane manner, taking into account the dignity of the detainee being transported. Now, if you look at that policy, female prisoners and male prisoners are not transported together. And if they are transported together, they have to be kept separated. They are not, like there's all of these fucking interacting policies, right? So this is a clarification. So we'll see it more like a bridge, all right? Again, so we are now subject to federal law. So this is, the West Australian Department of Justice is subjected to the Australian rights law, right? The Australian Rights Commission, National Principles for Child-Safe Organisations, right? So risk management strategies focus on preventing, identifying and mitigating risks to children and young people. The organisation, including staff and volunteers, understands children and young people's diverse circumstances and provides support and response to those who are vulnerable. Right? This is another interacting policy, the Australasian Youth Justice Administrators Standards 2009. So physical resources support safe and positive environments for staff, children and young people, right? So the scope. So it applies to all, so it only applies to Banksia Hill Detention Centre for a start, right? Now, here we go. So this COPP has been developed to provide a standardised approach to the management of trans, gender diverse or intersex detainees at Banksia Hill Detention Centre. Local, internal and external stakeholders have been engaged in the development of this to ensure the policy remains the commitment of the department, reflects the commitment of the department in recognition of these vulnerable detainees. Now, again, you can haggle over some of the details of this stuff. Are they are they vulnerable? Are they not? That stuff. But it's look at the intention behind it, okay? Which is that it's just there to fucking make some sense out of all of this. Calm your tits. Now, so some people, look at the wording here. Now, also look at how non-committal, because when you actually contrast this with the religious policy, it looks like it's largely been considered in line with religious accommodation more than the material needs of women. Now, what it's done is it's actually said, okay, if you are living as a woman, you would need X, Y, Z things, right? But it's pretty fucking balanced. All right. Now, I said pretty balanced. I have a problem with some of the process that could have been, and some of the language that leaves some questions, but that can be left to be interpreted, open to interpretation and open to trusting fucking professionals, okay, to be able to spot a murderer, rapist who's identifying into a fucking... Because the thing, again, I've only worked in welfare, not in the justice system, but welfare does sort of brush on the justice system a bit. And the thing that I think, unless you're in that system or those types of systems, the thing that is that everyone knows everyone else, okay? Everyone knows the people. They know the serial offenders. They know you get to know the prisoners. You know your caseworker. You know these things. Again, things fall through the cracks, but I'd just like to have a slightly more charitable view on this, okay? Right? Now, so some people, let's separate this from let's separate transactivism, okay? And woke people from actual fucking legit social justice issues, right? Let me have a look. So Connie said, they don't like them or gay people with their genital preferences. Don't know why they even want to be part of the Okay, yeah, that's derailing. Okay, yeah, I've actually started filtering comments. I think that's just one of those things. So, okay, now I'm just going to focus on the policy. I'll be ignoring comments for a bit. Sorry, just because I don't want to. I want to start trying to move away from like them and they as a like massive. Let's be specific, more specific in the way that we do things. So now, let's read the fucking policy. All right. So it clarifies some people may identify with a gender different to the one they were assigned at birth. Right. It's very non-committal. Right. This is actually good policy work, which is that it is just very clear that some people believe this thing, which is true. Some people do believe this thing. They're not stating it as fact, okay? And also when they say the one they were assigned at birth, right? They're using this because that is the appropriate language, right? That's like saying, Jesus is the Son of God, right? You say that because you are reflecting back that idea. Right? That is the lingo, that is the terminology. And as a policy document that corrections officers and people who are working in the system need to know, they need to know the lingo, okay? They're not stating this stuff as fact. They're saying this is what this is. That's the difference between a policy document and a fucking manifesto, okay? Now, so some people may identify with a gender different to the one they were assigned at birth. Trans and gender diverse people may identify as male, female, non-binary. That is neither male nor female, or in another way which reflects their gender identity. Which, okay, that's true. It's not true, but it's a truth. Some people do believe that, and a lot of them do. And when they come into the prison and they have this fucking thing, okay, and the Sex Discrimination Act says you can't discriminate against somebody based on gender identity in the prison system, that's a fucking lawsuit, okay? Calm your tits. So, intersex is a term used for people who are born with sexual anatomy, reproductive organs and or chromosomes that are inconsistent with the typical definitions of male and female. Intersex variation is quite separate to gender identity. People with an intersex variation identify as either male or female. However, there are some who identify as neither. Again, this is correct and true. Okay? It's actually a fairly balanced assessment. Okay? They're not saying that fucking trans people are intersex or have lady brains. It's actually fucking reasonable. Read the shit. Don't just read the releases and don't just fucking, I learned a very, very important lesson over this policy, which was that before you start fucking adding Mark McGowan and ministers on Twitter and saying what the fuck and jumping to conclusions, maybe read the policy. Okay? Now, I got caught up. I normally do that. I got caught up in this one just because I saw the anal penetration rainbow flag on the announcement, and I assumed the worst. But once I actually assumed the worst, sorry. But yeah. So anyway, it is unlawful to discriminate against a person based on their gender identity or intersex status. Okay, according to the Commonwealth Sex Discrimination Act of 1984, which I referred to. It is very clear. Okay. And I think people should start treading pretty fucking carefully about that. And you should start, I think actively talking about denying someone's gender identity. Technically, you could actually be arrested right now, I think. Or like at least, this is what I'm saying. It's the law as it stands. Okay? We've got to make better law that's more clear. But okay. Currently, in 2020, according to the Sex Discrimination Act, it is unlawful to discriminate against a person based on their gender identity or intersex status. Okay? Trans, non-binary, or intersex detainees shall be treated with the same respect and dignity accorded to any other detainee and shall not be discriminated against on the grounds of their gender identity or intersex status. Again, I don't see how anybody should have a problem with that unless you're actually fucking transphobic. The National LGBTI Health Alliance provides that trans, gender diverse and intersex children and young people are more likely to experience poor mental health, including depression, anxiety and self-harm due to social exclusion and discrimination. Now, yes, that is a contentious discussion, like what the cause, chicken, egg kind of thing. But again, that's a fact. There's nothing there that's fucking controversial, okay? For trans, right, this is not queer. You don't want us to exist and like murders. They're saying actual factual fucking things. So for trans, gender diverse or intersex children and young people, puberty and adolescence can be additionally challenging and a time of distress in regard to development and changes in their bodies. Again, true. Okay. Detainees identifying as trans, non-binary or intersex. Okay. Again, think person, Christian person who needs to pray on Sundays. Okay. Just go along with it. This is a policy document. It doesn't replace anything. It complements. So detainees identifying as trans, non-binary, intersex may experience segregation or reduced support network options. In the report, so there's a report here, Trans Pathways, the mental health experiences and care pathways of trans young people. Close to 50% of trans young people have attempted suicide at one point in their life. Now, again, that's a figure. We can talk about the cause and the studies and all that stuff, but again, they're not fucking there's nothing here that's fucking histrionic at this point, okay? Challenges may be exacerbated for detainees who have other distinct identities or experiences. This includes detainees who are Aboriginal from cold backgrounds, culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, have a disability, are from a religious faith or from regional or remote locations. Okay, so they're just special needs. Accommodating the needs of detainees who self-identify as trans, non-binary or intersex will be met through individualized personal support plans, like any other prisoner, okay, or detainee, sorry. Access to programs, medical and psychological services, and appropriate care from staff balanced against risks to security and good order of Banksia Hill Detention Centre. Okay, look, custodial officers. Now, again, a lot of this is directed towards custodial officers and people who are working in the prisons who don't know how to handle the situation. So this then gives them a set of written down processes. Okay, that's all this is. So custodial officers need to be aware of different terminology distinctions amongst trans and gender diverse detainees and be respectful of the detainee's own individual language. Again, I think that's a fair fucking request. Right? Again, when you look at things like the power imbalance, let's maybe assume that not all prisoners are fucking rapists and murderers for a start. A lot of, especially women, are in for non-violent crimes, right? Don't forget that, right? A lot of them are in for drug-related crime, theft, all of that sort of stuff, right? Largely very vulnerable, okay? Again, this is my frustration with sort of using the most extreme cases to sort of, yes, it's a consideration. There needs to be processes in place to make sure that doesn't occur, right? but I'm sure everyone's fucking aware of it. Everyone I've talked to has said that it's highly unlikely, right? It may happen, but, like this is emerging, okay? This is, okay, anyway. So on admission, so there's a bunch of processes here, right? Again, this just it looks at the same thing. Like it just basically it complements the admission of new detainees or prisoners or whatever you want to call it. It basically it's in accordance with this, right? COP 2.1 admission, and all it does is just clarify where there's not clarity. So admission about a detainee being trans or gender diverse, much like declaring a disability or any other special needs, should not be made. Assumptions about a detainee being trans or gender diverse should not be made by any staff, including on reception. Okay. So the custodial manager admitting the detainee shall inform the superintendent and senior managers by email if a detainee self-identifies as trans, non-binary, or intersex. The dignity, sensitivity, and privacy of any detainee who self-identifies as trans, gender diverse, or intersex shall be respected. Okay. They're not suddenly just going to go, oh, well then, okay, let's, it's just, this is the directive for staff to not get sued, okay, under the Sex Discrimination Act. It's a directive for staff. Now, so where a detainee self-identifies as trans, right, they should ask their preferred name and what their gender is. Where a detainee self-identifies as non-binary, they shall ask the detainee what their preferred name is. Okay? A lot of this assumes that biological sex is acknowledged and real. Okay? Now, there are a few things where it's unclear, and I think that needs to be clarified. And I think that what we should do is be working to clarify this stuff, not just screeching. Sorry again. Sorry about my flu. So particular care. This is how to fucking treat people, all right? It's not an order. It's just this is how to comply with the Act as it stands, all right? It's not... Okay, so that's the thing about the Australian Sex Discrimination Act that I think people are sort of freaking out about, is that a lot of these things are not... it's not an authoritarian declaration. That's if you don't do this at the moment, as the law stands, you'll get sued. Okay? That's the thing. There's lawsuits fucking coming for discrimination, for misgendering. I'm surprised that it hasn't happened already, right? And that's why, I'm going to start being a bit more careful about this stuff, because I didn't realize that it was actually fucking, discrimination. Until it's clarified, you've got to be very careful, okay? So particular care, right? No, hang on. So particular care shall be taken with usage of gender-specific terms. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Again, let's just move on. Preferred placement. Now, this is the thing. Where a detainee self-identifies as trans, non-binary, or intersex, the custodial officer shall ask the detainee their preferred placement and document the response. Okay? That doesn't say shall put them in the prison of their choice. It doesn't say that. Okay? It doesn't say that. It says it should be noted and documented. And you know why? So we'll move on to the next part of the policy. Searches. Custodial officers conducting the search of a detainee who is self-identified as trans, non-binary, or intersex shall check their internal software, right, internal database, for the preferred gender of the custodial officer to conduct the search. Right? Again, this is a breach of human rights if they don't. You can complain about the fact that it's a breach of human rights all you like, and that's a campaign that you can have. But this actual policy is compliant with the Sex Discrimination Act and all these other acts, right? So where a detainee identifies as trans, non-binary, or intersex, the detainee shall be searched by a custodial officer in accordance of the search preference documented, right? They may also request custodial officers of differing genders to complete top or bottom searches, right? Again, there's a whole other policy around searches that says that females get female custodial officers and males get male custodial officers, and that, this is just clarifying that when it's unclear, okay, they get one of their choice. Now, there's been that hypothetical scenario of what about the female officer forced to do internal searches of a male prisoner. Well, I would argue that's something that is part of the job. Okay. I again, we keep going into these hypothetical scenarios, and for all intents and purposes, again, like, what hill are we going to die on here? Okay, because I imagine that the right of the woman employee, she has a different fucking set of rules, and she actually has the right to, like, say no to this. Okay, that's the thing. There's probably another clarifying policy along the way that respects the wishes of that woman or that person. They all interact with each other. But when it comes up, this is how law works. This is why people need to know the difference between the law as written and case law, is that when it comes up, it goes to a committee, it goes to the warden, it goes to whoever's in charge, or whatever, to make a decision. If that decision is unsatisfactory, that decision goes to appeal, then it goes to the courts, and then there's eventually a decision. Okay, we're figuring this out. There's a new idea, a new belief, a new thing. There needs to be policy around the new thing. Okay, I think that I honestly, I think the media and I think the outrage machine is really just fucking destroying a lot of this conversation. And I'm going to rant about that too. So, make your voices known, ladies, but be smart about it. All right? Now, so in circumstances where the gender of a detainee is not readily identifiable, senior officer is to ask what gender the detainee identifies as. And that search must be conducted in accordance with the answer. Again, this complements the search policy, which says female officers search female inmates, or detainees, sorry, language has changed, and male search male, okay? So they're very clear that in using female and male in the Search Act, and gender in this one, because this is about gender, all right, and gender identity. Right? It's you got to see it and understand how these jigsaws all sort of work together. And then when there's other gaps, right, then hopefully the case law will kick in, or decisions will be made, or, this is how it's a constantly moving thing, and you can't expect people to get it right perfectly, like the first time. So, initial placement. So also remember, this actually is a policy for Banksia prison, correctional only at the moment. It's not statewide, first of all. So this is a policy for this prison, okay? And so anyway, okay. Excuse me. Now, so the detainee's preferred placement shall be considered. Oh, here we go. Initial placement. Placement of transgender, diverse, or intersex detainees must include consideration for their safety and welfare. All right? Again, I can't see how anyone would turn around and say, well, fuck them. Right? It's policy. All right? This is one of those things where designing around the 95% versus the sort of the outliers. And it's like the outliers are decided through different mechanisms, right? And this is where I'm frustrated. So risks may include increased vulnerability through experiencing sexual coercion and psychological distress from other detainees, which is a valid thing, right? As such, the detainee must be managed in a manner that responds to their particular risk. Okay, again, it's constant, and again, it works in conjunction with all of the other things, including the Sex Discrimination Act and the rights of female prisoners, and safety and dignity of female prisoners. Okay, so the detainee's preferred placement, documented in TOMS, shall be considered. That's all it says. It's just got to be considered. Okay. Initial placement of the detainee shall be made in conjunction with the unit manager, senior officer, and superintendent. Checks and balances in place. Okay. Placement shall also be managed in accordance with this policy, the placement policy, okay, which is based on risk, safety, violent, non-violent, all those sorts of things, right? Also, don't forget, solitary confinement or being isolated is actually considered a punishment in prison system, and it's actually considered a human rights violation in many cases. So just putting them in their own room, they've got to think carefully about that too. right? That's the thing. It's like they're balancing a whole bunch of different things. I know I've been talking a long time on this, but I think it's worth going through. Where possible, contact with additional support services and or advocacy agencies shall be made prior to placement of the detainee, right? So contact with the support services. So the first thing that they've got to do is put them in contact with the appropriate supports. Common sense, right? Social worker, all those things, right? Excuse me. Property and clothing. A lot of it deals with this. The custodial officer should ask the detainee which clothing they would prefer to wear, for example, male or female or a mix of both. The superintendent shall consider providing the detainee with clothing and personal effects, e.g. toiletries, appropriate for their gender identity and individual requirements in accordance with COP 4.1 property. Okay, so it just clarifies that. If it's, they can have makeup if they want, or they can have fucking deodorant and shit if they want, right? Female deodorant, right? Additional clothing and personal effects shall be assessed based on individual requirements, risk and safety. Haircuts shall be managed in accordance with this policy. Okay? The superintendent must always consider any risks and safety issues when issuing property. Placement. The superintendent or deputy superintendent shall convene a meeting as soon as possible to discuss the long-term placement of the detainee. Contact with additional support services and or advocacy agencies shall be made where possible prior to long-term placement of the detainee. Now, this is good. Okay, it means there's a process in place. It also means that those that are fucking, there's known people. There's people that are like, they know, like I said before, when they're taking the piss, it's obvious. Okay, especially if they're already in prison. All right, lawyers are going to lawyer. Sociopaths are going to sociopath. Okay, and yes, it's going to fail. That's unfortunate. It's going to fail. And it has failed. But a sense of proportion is important here, okay? So, we need to take the individual policy on its merits, right? Yeah, well, that is but I'm saying for just, yeah. Okay, I'm not going down that fucking rabbit hole. So, now, where are we? So contact with additional support services and advocacy agencies shall be made where possible prior to long-term placement of the detainee. Where possible, the detainee shall be given the opportunity to provide input into the unit into which they will be placed. They'll be given the opportunity to provide input, which is like basically, okay, you can ask, but it's not up to you, okay? It's very clear that they have the right to ask, but it needs to be balanced and assessed and weighed up against sort of other factors and all of the other policies and all the other risks, okay? So the superintendent's multidisciplinary team, not all idiots, I might add. Some of them are actually quite competent, like, actual people that know the system and understand that rapists rape, okay? And know what men do and know these things and know that women are more vulnerable. Have some trust in people, okay? The superintendent's multidisciplinary team meeting shall include, but is not limited to, A, senior managers, operational staff, director of health services, psychologist, mental health nurse, or psychiatrist. The MDT shall assess each detainee individually in regards to needs, placement, and risk. Isn't this the policy that we want? Right? And this is when people were getting outraged over this policy, I was sitting there going, what do we do? Are we kicking them into the sun now? Is that their solution? Because I don't see an alternative solution to this process. It's actually a good process. Okay? When you consider that solitary confinement, like you put, okay, so anyway, you can't just house someone on their own. That's considered fucking isolation. That's a human rights violation as well. So you've got to there's all of these competing factors, right? So consideration in terms of placement shall also include, but is not limited to, A, any risks to the detainee and or others, the detainee's preference for accommodation, risks to safety, security, and the good order of BHDC, the nature of the offending, personal circumstances, medical requirements, at-risk assessment in accordance with, 7.2, any, like suicidality, right? And yes, there is that aspect. But again, there's a lot of, I don't know how much more you can put in place other than making sure that it is crystal clear around sex and gender and the problem of gender identity being crystal clear in the Sex Discrimination Act, which is not the problem of state government. That has to be passed at the federal level. I can't see how this is fucking like... Again, okay, so trans, gender diverse or intersex detainees shall be placed into an area of BHDC with due regard to their safety and at-risk status and managed in accordance with 7.2 at risk. Again, they've got processes in place. Okay, if you're mentally ill, withdrawing from drugs, violent, all those things kick in. The MDT shall consider a referral to Perth Children's Hospital Gender Diversity Service or other appropriate medical services determined by psychological or health services staff. Right? Again, I can't see how that would be that's their right to do. Right? The placement decision shall be communicated to the detainee. The superintendent or deputy superintendent shall inform the assistant commissioner, women and young people, of the placement decision and management of the detainee. So if this decision is made, there it has to go up the chain. Okay? Management plan. Superintendent or deputy superintendent shall convene a meeting with the MDT as soon as possible to discuss the ongoing management of the detainee. Management consideration shall be given to, but not limited to, any risks to the detainee and or other detainees, risks to staff, risks to safety, security and the good order of BHDC, the nature of offending and historical offences, personal circumstances, ongoing support, disability, medical requirements, right? Ongoing support, at-risk assessment in accordance with at-risk, are the relevant issues, okay? Trans, gender diverse and intersex detainees are to be provided with the same access to services and programs as other detainees. The management plan shall be explained to the detainee. This seems like fairly common sense policy to me, all right? Access to support. Unless you want to deny them access to gender clinic, right? Then that's a separate conversation, but this just seems like it's just in compliance with the Sex Discrimination Act and all those other things. So, access to support. Where possible, contact with, again, in the shadow of deaths in custody and all those other fucking abhorrent things that are the Justice Department. Again, we're living in the shadow of these things. You have to consider those things. So, where possible, contact with additional support services and or advocacy agencies shall be considered. Accommodating the needs of a detainee who identifies transgender, diverse or intersex will be met through an individualised personal support plan, access to programs, medical and psychological services, and appropriate care from staff. It's non-committal. It doesn't say, it just says they'll be referred to the appropriate people and managed individually based on their needs. It depends is actually the fucking best solution in most of these situations. Case-by-case basis, and I like that this is actually the policy. The policy is that it's a case-by-case basis. All right? The MDT shall ensure a PSP is prepared. Okay, yeah. So visits from friends and family, social visits should be managed in accordance with social and interfacility visits. It just affirms the existing policy. Access to health services. Access to the same health services, right, in accordance with their clinical needs, which is, gender diversity clinic. Escorts. So this clarifies because the escorts policy, says that escorts have to be the same, female or male. This clarifies that. The senior officer admissions shall ensure transgender, diverse or intersex detainees are placed on the special needs escort list for all external escorts in accordance with scheduling escorts, right? So they're isolated. They're not escorted with others, right? Detainees, post-admission. So if they identify as transgender, diverse or intersex post-admission, the pace of gender transitioning is usually determined by the detainee, right? Support shall be made available and where relevant, health services may take appropriate referrals. Again, that's a human rights thing. You can't deny someone like a medical referral. It's in it's discrimination under the Sex Discrimination Act. So where a detainee identifies that they're transitioning to a different gender, a meeting shall be called to determine the detainee's requirements in accordance with this COPP. Superintendent shall be responsible for ensuring documentation of the detainee's preferred gender, name, pronouns, searching and placement requirements is completed, right? So now there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Just goes through that process, right? there's measures in place, right? Now, the thing that is concerning to me, so these are the related legislation, right? This is the problem here. This is where the problem lies, right? Also, the Equal Opportunity Act, Young Offenders Act, and Young Offenders Regulations, right? So this is where the problem is. I can't see why everyone's fucking getting their fucking tits in a twist. All right, calm down. I don't know. Should I say something? I was ranting about that earlier in the video. I don't know who else is watching, and I've gone too long. Excuse me. But my point is, right, that I don't know what any other that's a good policy, good process, good solution. The answer is there needs to be policy for this thing. Okay, we have to make policy. There has to be a process for it. It's unclear for officers and anyone working in the system what to do. That clarifies it. It's basically just reaffirming the current policies, and that's it. Now the problem is that obviously self-ID is the issue, but I think that it's been given the treatment, which is that if they say that they are, you have to affirm it, but you don't necessarily have to comply with it. And that, other than the things that don't hurt anybody, like pronouns and shit like that, I can't see any real major issue with this this policy. And I think that, honestly, I think if you're sort of, I don't know, I don't see it the way that other people see this one. And obviously they conflate sex with gender and those sorts of things, but at the same time, and I had concerns about that this could have been better policy if it had been sort of consulted with people who don't believe in gender identity. I thought that would have been a good I guess a good stakeholder to have. But for the most part, this thing's pretty balanced, right? And if you've got a fucking grievance with this stuff and the lack of clarity around gender identity, then you have to lobby the federal government to amend the act, right? This policy is in line with the Sex Discrimination Act. It's not just to be woke. It just clarifies some policies. And so, I don't know whether you guys, this is my frustration with ideology and clubs in general, is that someone suddenly decides you're a radical feminist, therefore now if you deviate from that fucking view and don't capitulate to the whole fucking, men can't be in women's prisons and the most extreme and rigid view that is actually just an unworkable view in my opinion, right? Other than, causing fucking massive distress to somebody who, it's a violation of their human rights for a start to put someone in isolation on their own. What are we going to do? Build a prison for the fucking, for trans prisoners, right? Then you're segregating, and then it's there's all these interacting fucking laws and policies and opinions and feelings, and in the middle of that is a fucking kid who identifies as non-binary, right? Who just wants to be called fucking him. And whatever. I think that there's just a massive disproportionate fucking reaction to this thing. I've read this 3 times. I had more concerns about it the first time. I have fewer concerns the more I read it, because I've actually, gone through and read all of these things. Anyway, I'm sure everyone's fucking angry at me now and unfriending me as I speak and gonna fucking tell me that I'm wrong and kick me out of fucking feminism, because I'm not. I've been kicked out of the feminists by the lib fems, and I'm kicked out now by the fucking people who think that, biological men who live as women, don't need sort of a case-by-case special circumstances scenario. Right? I honestly think that if you have a problem with that policy, you don't have much faith at all in the capacity of the system to work, which again, I know a lot of the systems have failed. I know the systems have failed. I get that. I understand that. But this is Western Australia. I know the people, right? It's people are going to fail. Yes, the system's going to fail, but you can't stop people failing at doing their jobs badly all of the time. You can put as much in place as you can, but overall I feel like this is a step forward policy wise, and that yet again WA is sort of showing fucking sanity, you know, not this fucking, you know, like this, obviously we don't have self-ID here legally, right? But the prisons acknowledge that self-ID is a thing. Like the people are going to self-identify whether it's law or not, and they need a fucking policy for it, right? That policy doesn't overrule the Parliamentary Act. It supports it and complements it and clarifies it and interprets it. And then you've got Superintendent, you've got, you know, the Director General, you've got fucking the commissioners, you've got all these people who sit there and on a case-by-case basis, right? If a decision needs to be made, I imagine that if a fucking a rapist, you know, but fucking hell, you know, like, can we find, this is, again, this is my frustration with activism in general and ideology in general, okay, is that it causes people to focus way too much on others and people who don't believe what we believe. Because believe it or not, there's a whole lot of people that aren't radical feminists, right? If you want your right to believe something, okay, then you got to respect other people's right to believe what they believe. You can think it's stupid all you like, okay, but this is part of living in like in a pluralistic, complicated, messy, beautiful, sloppy, fucking terrible, fucking patriarchal capitalist democracy. It's messy. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But I think a lot of people are letting the perfect be the enemy of like good enough, right? Is that there is a mechanism in place that does make it clear that you have to consider the risks for the other inmates. All of the other policies, the Act, the Prisoners Act, the fucking human rights, fucking all of these things, right? Also the fact that you can't just go in like separating someone who says they're trans. You can't just go, oh, well, off you go then into isolation for the rest of your sentence. You can't just lock them away from everyone. What are you supposed to do? Like, honestly, and that's the thing where I think, and this has been my experience, which is why, another reason why I actually can't be in the Greens, because I actually really, it ended up frustrating me in the end, actually, was that when I was doing policy work and was secretary of the Greens in WA, and I was policy convener for some time, activists will not negotiate. That's the difference between an activist and, say, a politician or somebody who's in policy. Policy involves compromise. Okay. And yes, the role of the activist is to get as much, the policy has to have enough checks and balances in place. Now, the thing that pisses me off is, yes, that women's groups were not consulted on this to make sure that it was clarified, and that the solution is really, the lack of clarity in the Sex Discrimination Act is fucking obvious and abundantly clear. That's glaring to any senior policy people, like, or any minister. Like the Minister for Women should really, and the Human Rights Minister should really be trying to look at that act and make sure that that is clarified. Now, I have a feeling that politicians are too fucking afraid, and they're waiting for case law to statutory interpretation to kick in. But at the same time, like, this is just an area of law that's uncertain. This is the same with the internet, cyber law. In the late 90s, the law was not clear. So they had to legislate, and they had to fucking, make policies and cobble together stuff. And now the law is fucking a dog's breakfast, and we need to legislate. It's the same thing with gender, okay? So you can scream that doesn't exist all you want. A lot of people believe it. A lot of people think it is real, and that needs to be, like, there needs to be a policy on it, on how to handle it. So I'm of the view that, and clarity, right? And that's the thing. Don't let this online fucking screeching, like, distract you from what's actually the problem here, which is a lack of clarity and the fact that this is a new phenomenon. I need to fucking go make a phlegm snort. Can you tell? It's like making the noise. But I'm just like, it's this is my frustration with, I guess, ideology in general. Radical feminism should not be an ideology. It is a framework for analysis. There are other frameworks in which to look at things. There are other lenses. And yes, the radical feminist one in this instance is an important one. Okay, but it's not the only one. And so can people stop calling me dinks, please? I'm a feminist. I believe in women's rights. Okay? That's it. Don't fucking put me, I'm not gender critical. I'm not in a fucking club. And I'm not going to sign up to your fucking constitutional fucking requirements that I believe what you believe. I'm a policy person. I believe that policy is either good policy or bad policy, and it has been adequately consulted or not consulted. It leaves loopholes or it doesn't. It is ripe for abuse or it is not. That's the thing. And in terms of what I've seen so far, right, there's things that can be done better, right? Greater clarity around sex versus gender identity. Greater clarity around what gender identity actually means, whether that actually does include those 300 genders or whether it does, like those things. Making like a clarity around like gender dysphoria and transsexual, like actual physical transition versus self-ID in law, making that clear, right? Which is that, like there has to be some sort of like legal distinction there, and that isn't there. Right? That's the thing. And that's where the confusion lies, and we're figuring that out. But like, I'm not, I have complicated views on things. I have some liberal feminist views on some things, right? And I do think that there's a whole bunch of rad femmes that have a lot of fucking trauma that they need to deal with. And like, it's like policy's either good or bad. The process is either followed well or it's not. Now, there are some issues there, right? But fuck me. Right? I'm not, like people are like, are we going to organize and fucking support this and protest this, and we're going to mob the minister's office with fucking complaints? Are you? Why? What's your view? What's the alternative? Based on what I've showed you now, right? What's your alternative view? What's your alternative process? Right? That you cause someone that the state causes someone deliberate mental distress by denying their belief that they are of their gender identity, which is deeply held. It's a deeply held belief. Even if you don't think it's real, it's a deeply held belief, and they have the right to actively turn around and cause someone distress over their deeply held beliefs, right? It's no different to the fucking Yankee fucks coming on my channel and calling like all feminism cancer and fucking, lefty fucking rara. That causes me distress. That's harassment too, right? How is that? Like, that's what I'm saying. The state can't do that to people because people have rights. Prisoners are vulnerable in the shadow of things like this, like Aboriginal deaths in custody and prison reform and all of these things, and brutality. You would think that people would be more on board with this stuff. And that's the thing. It's like, it's not as fucking black and white as, your chromosomes are in this prison. It's not that fucking simple, right? I would argue that it's just more operational, that for all intents and purposes, if you need fucking cosmetics and fucking female shit and, largely live as a woman, again, let's just leave that fucking where it is, all right? You wear female clothes, you socialize in female groups and those sorts of things for the most part, and you are non-violent, okay? Right? Then operationally it would make sense. Right? Right. What Uber, that's like, what the fuck? It's the same with like, anyway, I'm just frustrated. Fucking frustrated. It's like when I was in hospital, right? And they have the wards. They have like the falls ward, they have the, the neuro ward, they have the surgical ward, because they have specific needs. And it's easier because they have certain equipment and all those things for those certain needs, right? And that's just how hospitals are designed. And sometimes, like when I, like there was, what was it? Well, one of the times I fucking died. When was that? Oh yeah, when I was in the coma and stuff, but I had I was in the falls ward, right? Because I was in a fucking the old ladies ward because I'd just come out of a coma and I was still non compos mentis for a few days. So I was in that because I was given that level of care, and I think that that's sort of one of those things where there's also a resource issue here. Anyway, I'm thinking it through. I know that you're all gonna fucking have a tantrum. Go have it. Stay mad. But you come to me for some loving truth. Okay, you don't come to me for affirming. You come to me for some fucking tough love. And I don't think there's much wrong with this policy. And I think that the energy is much better directed towards making this policy better, right? With a level head saying, okay, what can we learn from this? What can we do better? Looking at the actual problem, which is the lack of clarity in the Sex Discrimination Act and all of the acts that are actually informing most of this stuff, right? And actually looking at the data, okay? We have to look at how many, I don't know how many rapists are fucking in female prisons right now that I've identified as trans women. I don't. We'd have to get some clarity on that. If that is a thing, I would imagine that these mechanisms are in place now, that any member of the public can actually use this to their advantage and actually ask the minister if they are adhering to this policy and put an FOI and ask whether this process has been followed. But there was no policy, so that process couldn't be followed. Now there's a policy, now they're accountable to it. So now that it's written down, if someone actually fucks up this policy, they're accountable and liable. Okay, so you just stay on it. As an activist, a much better way of use of your time would be making sure that you are writing ministerial letters to say, and doing FOI requests to make sure that every single one of these, if there are any sort of murderers and rapists in female prisons, right? If that process was followed, why, and all of the documents around it and the reasoning. That's now, because there's a policy, you can now fucking ask about it. That's your right as a citizen. That's the thing. You put it as a question in Parliament. You put pressure on them. You don't sit around screaming that gender's not real. That horse is bolted. Okay? Treat it like religion and religious accommodation in your mind. You have to, right? That's the difference. That's the difference between a fucking activist screaming on Twitter 24/7 and something that works for everyone. Okay? You're never going to get all of what you want. This is why I quit the fucking Greens, because people were screeching, right? And they would just have tantrums and would derail the process because they weren't getting 100% of what they want. And that's part of the problem with the consultation thing, is that I can also understand how the so-called TERFs, right, would not be consulted, because some of the people that I fucking interact with scream at me. And I don't see that as productive either. I don't see how arguing about something that isn't that someone else believes and needs a policy is productive. So I can kind of see it. I'm not saying it was okay. I'm saying the assumption that the gender critical feminists are not coming to the table and aren't capable of actually agreeing with this policy for the most part, is that was a false assumption, right? But for the most part, I can understand if you hold the view, if the optics of some of the gender criticals on Twitter, the Twitter swarm, just the fucking misgendering everyone left, right, and center all the time. Okay, it's like no different to fucking just like the atheist bros who just swarm on religious. It's like God's not real, God's not real, God's not real, God's not real. It's like, yeah, but they believe it's real. The horse is bolted. Okay, now we need to make sure that we protect our rights and affirm ourselves. But I think that just fucking hell, calm your tits. Calm your fucking tits, rad femmes. I want to start some. I actually would like to start thinking about this. I'm thinking about a lot of things, but this one's an easy one to set up, which is a women's mag. I want to call it the rag or something, but it's a women's mag. But it's like, we can have, we can talk about these sorts of things, and an Australian focused one. We'll think about. I'll think about that. And it's not going to be a rad femme only. It's not going to be only who is the purest feminist. The only rule should be that people are allowed their fucking opinions, right? And like ideologues can fuck off. I've said that before. If you're actually transphobic, I'm not interested because it's, I don't like you can have a joke, right, about like the dudes in the beard taking the piss, but I'm not. Jesus Christ. I don't know why people are claiming me in that you're a man though tribe. I don't see how it's productive. Anyway, it may have been productive early on, but it's not productive now. People believe it. People believe in gender identity. We need to just accept that. They're now a group of stakeholders that need to be engaged and consulted with. Right? So, yeah, I think that's why many men are into GC stuff now, because it makes them feel good to be able to call other people idiots and feel, yeah. And it's like, yeah, and I have a joke, right? I apologize for my my nose blockage. Hang on, let me mute and let me be disgusting, okay? Just one sec. There we go. I had to do a yeah, it is. It's like the atheism stuff. It's the same old fucking douchebag religious troll war stuff. And what I'm seeing is that there's an awful lot of women who are being really fucking dragged down and misunderstood. And do you know because of the behavior of men in this movement and the anti-wokes? And I'm concerned, what I actually want to do is set up a fucking organization that's actually perceived to be reasonable and rational and gender critical without any fucking extremists that are bullying trans people, right? The optics of it are just fucking terrible sometimes. And that's the thing about this movement. And I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if nobody fucking watches me or listens to me. All right? Because everyone's just being fucking idiots and being crazy. And at some point we need to work towards solutions, right? I think that's something that you should definitely mute. But I'm just saying, right? I think it's really I'm just frustrated that you can't even suggest compromise without people screaming about their own trauma or or projecting their own shit onto everyone, right? Deal with your stuff, okay? I'm seeing an awful lot lately, especially with this whole COVID stuff and, everyone being on lockdown, everyone being a bit fucking screwy in any way, but they're sort of seeing radical feminism as a way, as basically the same escape for trauma and man-hating and not dealing with the shit that they're supposed to deal with. And yeah, anyway, I'm just, I don't know. I'm frustrated. I'm trying to focus on helping. And I know I make jokes and I know I take the piss out of the most extreme, dumb idiot shit. But at the same time, right, when it comes to policy and actually engaging with legit grown up fucking groups, don't act like a Twitter storm to a minister. What are you writing angry letters for about a fucking a policy that I actually can't see much wrong with? And I can't see much other alternative that doesn't result in fucking human rights violations. Fuck me, guys. Fucking hell. Anyway, stay mad. I'm just going to have no friends. How's that sound? I'm just going to go back to being fucking reasonable, right? And anyway, the last 48 hours with this policy has been a little bit eye-opening for me around the behavior of some of these culture wars people. And I don't know whether I necessarily want to be attached to that kind of thing, because I sat there thinking that we were interested in a conversation and good policy and being heard. And then when a policy is actually within the realm of possible, when you're all things considered, not that bad, and everyone is screeching about men in women's prisons when that's not the case, right? And screenshotting out of context policy, right? And one line out of it and screenshotting things and taking it out of context. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that. Or not even reading the fucking thing, or reading the Act. I actually went and read the Sex Discrimination Act, the Prisons Act, I read the fucking the Young Offenders Act, and like the women in custody. I can't remember what it's called. There's a whole fucking set of policies around that. I read the search policy, all of that yesterday. Right? It's fine. I can't see how this could not actually be a good model. So long as again, they're not saying self-ID is recognized in law. They're saying that if you identify that way, there's a process to follow, and they can't deny that because as the law stands, it's a violation of human rights and it's discriminatory. It's a belief. Okay? Anyway, fuck me. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. I wouldn't want to be fucking... Who wants to be in fucking politics anyway? Maybe I should be. Maybe I need to be the only person with the balance of power in these fucking things and then knock everyone's heads together. Maybe that's my goal. I'm just fucking sick of activists who just like, again, I can agree with you and I can agree with what you're saying and still think you're like not being productive and it's not going to work and that it's not, that you're overreacting. And then you can turn around, and if you say that me saying you're overreacting is like gaslighting you and tone policing you, you're doing the exact same thing that wokes do when you say you're setting, like with the white fragility stuff. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm saying you're overreacting. Okay? You're conflating like a hypothetical, and they are. Okay? It's not hypothetical around the world. Okay? It's not hypothetical around the world. But in Western Australia, until, it's hypothetical. That's how the law works. Right? Try to have some faith in people. Anyway, I'm not better. Baseman just said I'm looking better. I fucking feel like turd. But I thought I really wanted to do this one, and I know this is right. Oh, thank you for you and JK. I think we should get JK Rowling to follow me. That should be the campaign because I need her support and money. I need JK Rowling to help me fund women a global women's organization that's fucking rational, but has funding. Why don't we set up the Rowling Foundation that gives scholarships to young fucking to young lawyers and women who want to work in policy and law, and actually in or psychology or whatever, and women in professions who were scholarships. That's what you do. Give scholarships, right? The Rowling Foundation, scholarships for young girls like me who grew up in poverty and went and got a degree and in policy and were able to tell all of the rad femmes to calm their fucking tits on YouTube and make zero money out of it. Actually, sorry to hear that laugh. That's my chest. I have real trouble breathing. I think I might be getting I think I've got mild pneumonia, but anyway. But what was I going to say? I can't remember. Oh yeah, I'm a bit stuck with career at the moment. I know I've got to kind of get out of digital at some point. I'm heading, post 50. I'm aging out of this industry very quickly, but I'm just trying to think about what my next step is. I don't know. I'm thinking of doing my clinical psychology or counseling. I was going to go for counseling, but I realized that I'm actually a status hoe. And I will never not be happy unless I'm actually a clinical psych rather than a counselor. Because it just, whenever I think of a counsellor, I always think of like a hippie lady with fucking peacock earrings and shit, talking about fucking, I always think of, with turquoise beads and shit. Not a clinical psych. I'd like to clinical psych sort of. I think if I pour that on top, it allows me to sort of have some flexibility and maybe there's lots of different opportunities there with terms of like cybersecurity or whatever, and I'm thinking about doing that, but I haven't decided. I'm still deciding. I think I've almost decided, but I'm 3 into the 5+1 if that's the case, so I've got like fucking years to go if I do that. The way JK Rowling is misunderstood, that one's just so fascinating. That said, I can also understand it, right? That's why when Glenn Greenwald said what he said about the sort of J.K. Rowling defense fund, like the swarm, I call them the swarm, you know, when he referred to them being a bit like full on, I get what he means, right? And I think a lot of us need to start thinking about the optics of what we're doing and whether it's the smart approach, right? It looks very much like atheist bros of old screaming at fucking Christians 24/7 that God's not real. It does. It looks religious. It looks like it does. And I understand because I know I agree with you, but the behavior looks dodgy. Okay? I can see why they say what they say. And I can also see why when a policy like this that seems relatively good faith and is fairly sensible, all things considered in context, right? When you're turning around and then saying that you're outraged by it, I can see, because my first thought was, what are you going to do? What's the solution? We're going to kick trans women into the sun now. Is that your fucking answer? What the fuck? That was how I reacted yesterday when someone started piling onto me about like men in prisons, in female prisons. And I went like, well, what's your fucking solution then? We don't have one. We need one. We need a policy, right? We need a process, all right? You might not believe it, but they do, and they need to be managed in the fucking prison. What do we do, right? Otherwise, we get accused of fucking like torturing people. You don't get like, fuck me. But yeah, I do. You know, I can kind of understand it. I can understand that, like, again, principle of charity and getting into the mind of somebody who's, you know, somewhat rational. I can see why people think, or the perception is that that the, you know, gender criticals don't want trans people to exist. I can see that feedback. Again, hyperbole, etc., tribalism, blah, blah, blah. But again, look at where I like to look at where the misunderstandings are and see if there can be a bridge built, right? It's not fucking rockets. You just got to watch this fucking thing for like a couple of months and you see how insane it is, right? And sorry, guys, but stay mad. I love you, but stay fucking mad. Just because I, you know, acknowledge and agree that radical feminism is an important framework in which to understand the world, especially the, you know, women's rights. It's not the fucking only thing in the world. Other people have other opinions and perspectives. And so anytime you're going to start like flopping your ideology all over me and imposing it on me and like forcing me to comply with it and not think for myself, I'm going to tell you to fuck off. And I don't care if I agree with you. Right? At the end of the day, we need to all live together in peace and harmony and try to fucking coexist. All right? That's it. That's my TED Talk. 2 hours. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to go. So be nice to each other. Fucking hell. Calm down. And also, no, I'm not going to I'm going to write reasonable things to the appropriate people as needed, right? I will do FOIs and things as needed and follow the process. I'm not going to do a fucking outrage campaign. You're no better than the fucking wokes if you're doing that shit. All right? Especially if you're going off half-cocked over a policy that has things in it that aren't actually even fucking right or true. Okay? All right. I love you. Coexist with my cat all the time. Exactly. You know, we learn to coexist with each other, right? One of the things about a healthy marriage is just learning to let shit go. Okay? Right? Anyway, I'm going to go. I love you. Fucking calm your tits and don't be a fuckwit. You're a fuckwit mug. Bye. Oh, yeah. You want to donate, go to my website and stuff. Love you. Bye.